Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Marian Diaz, and I'm the director of Wisdom Ways Center for Spirituality. And I couldn't be more excited to be here with all of you this evening as we launch our first inaugural live stream with Reverend Dr. Janet Johnson. Wisdom Ways is a ministry of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, the St. Paul province. So we're happily sponsored by those sisters, and we run a ministry where we really want to focus on bringing people from a space of deep inner listening to the voices that are inside of them, to the spirit inside of them, and bringing that into a life of action on behalf of a better world. And I think really that we just probably couldn't start with a better conversation that I hope we're going to have tonight, and I'm just really glad that you're going to be here sharing this with us. Let me just say that we will be monitoring the chat. If you would like to chat in a question, we will be pausing a couple different times during the conversation to bring those to our space here. And if you are watching just via a link, you will need to be able to log in to some type of a YouTube account to be able to chat. So if you have that difficulty, just note that that's there. So Reverend Dr. Janet Johnson is an ordained elder in the AME Church and brings to us just a wide breadth of experience. And we really just want to raise up diverse stories of the spiritual journey here at Wisdom Ways. She is also the founder and director of Connected to the Vine Ministries. So I'm hoping she'll talk to you about that, because that really is, I think, a special ministry that really showcases the gifts that she has to offer for all of us. So I hope that you move into a space yourselves of really receptive listening to her and are able to engage either through the chat or just by your own reflective listening with our conversation today. So with that, really, I'd just like to open this up to you and let your story shine.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Miriam. I am excited about being here with all of you today, all of those who are connected virtually or through YouTube, however it is. And I am excited to get to share my story. I'm a blessed woman of God, and I'm going to share with you my journey. And so I have a couple slides I want you to be able to take a look at as I share my story. And I'm going to start from the very beginning. I am a Southern girl, so I'm going to be sharing exactly that. And so I've got the first slide that you see is the ministry name. That is the ministry name that my husband and I operate from, Connected to the Vine Ministries. And it is based on John chapter 15, verse 5. And it states, I am the vine and you are the branches. He that abides in me and I in him bring forth much fruit. For without me you can do nothing. And so that is the base of our ministry, Connected to the Vine. So that's where I start with. And you'll see in my journey how I get to this, for how God brought that to me. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and share some pictures from the very beginning of my journey. So we'll go back and forth from me to the pictures, but this is where it all began. You should be able to see the place where I was born. That's where I would like to start. Wow. Happy Bend, Arkansas. Wow. That is, I found out it's an unincorporated area. And for many years, it was not even on the map. It was a small community of African American families in Arkansas. In the central part of the state, we were about 60 miles north of the capital, Little Rock. And that's where my family and I began our journey, is in Happy Bend, Arkansas, again, which is now on the map, but that's fairly recent. It did not used to be on the map. So Happy Bend, Arkansas is where it started. And when you look at the slide, you'll see again, I also have our family home there. There is a picture of our family home a little 6-room house that we were born and raised in. You see it there, beautiful. For me, it was beautiful, but it looks like a shack. But it was where lots of love was poured out to the 11 children that were born and raised there, 10 girls and 1 boy. And if you see the picture, you can't see it very well, but my baby sister, I am the 10th of 11 children. And so the picture shows my baby sister in the yard there. And the other photo that you see are my parents, the substance, the foundation of who we are. Ed and Rena Williams, those are our parents. They birthed 11 children. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. Of course, what else could you be with 11 children, right? With all that is involved in managing a household. Rena did a fantastic job. She is setting an example for us. I don't think they would share it with you, but what I came to as I did prepared for this is there's 3 things that my family, my mother and father, wanted to instill in their children. And so one was an education, high school education. That's what they wanted to accomplish with those 11 children, a high school education. A good work ethic. That was the second thing that they wanted to instill within us, a good work ethic, and then a Christian foundation. Now, if you talk to them, they would not say that, but that is what they portrayed as they interacted with their children. And so I'm going to be talking about how that worked in each of us, in each of the 11 of us. So I am just very proud of my heritage from Happy Bend, Arkansas, and how my parents prepared me and my siblings to journey out into this world from where we were. And so that's what these pictures are that you see here. You see Happy Bend, you see our homestead, and you see church. Diggs Chapel, AME Zion Church is the spiritual foundation that we started in. Now, in this community of predominantly African American families, there was a Baptist church there, but some of the families were Methodist and some of the families were Baptist. And so our family, we were Methodist. So our church was about 7 miles from where we lived. And so we walked to church on Sunday. There was kind of a back road that we could take. Yes.
That's a long way. That's a commitment.
It was what you did.
Yeah, you did it.
You didn't think anything about it because it was what you knew. So that's how we started out. Now I want to tell you a little bit about Rena and Ed, so you can hear and notice how they modeled for us how to live. And so Rena, again, a stay-at-home mom with 11 children, did all of the work around the house and with the children. A huge garden, because we lived off the land, and the extra vegetables were used to do canning, preparing the fruit for the winter, the food for the winter, and all of the things, the cows, the chicken, the pigs, because we would prepare those things to have for winter meat. We would, in the fall every year, the families in the community would come together to each household, to each family, to slaughter the pigs, and we had smokehouses where we stored the meat. So Rena, she helped with all of that. And she was a brilliant woman. I mean, we quilted, we knew how to quilt, we knew how to embroidery, we knew how to do all sorts of things that she taught us. And she was an avid florist, really. She had beautiful flower beds. And so that's what we learned from her. She really showed us how to manage a household. That's what we learned from Rena. And then from our father, who was Ed, he was this is the story that I heard, was that he got along with the whites and the blacks. He had great character. And I learned this about him many years down the road in my life. He had 2 jobs that I'm aware of. One was in a mustard plant that was quite a ways away from us. And we were told by a cousin that he had great favor with the big boss. And so actually the bosses had actually turned the plant over to him. And when anything happened or was needed, they would direct them to our father. I never knew that as a child, but learned that as an adult, that he was a great man of character. And again, he had good relations with the whites and the blacks. So at some point in his journey, he transitioned from working in the mustard factory to working for the water company. He started out digging ditches, but ended up being a meter reader. An African-American man with a job like that in the 50s, late 40s, 50s was like unheard of. So we were really blessed because of the favor, I guess, that he had experienced in finding work and being able to take care of his family. So that's the substance, that's the man and woman that stood before us and modeled for us a good work ethic, a Christian foundation, and that education was important. Now, I don't know how much education either one of them had. I do not have that information, but those were the 3 goals or objectives that they had for their children. So I just kind of wanted to share the foundation.
Right.
What a good, solid foundation for us as children. And so that's what I wanted to share from this slide with you, the beginning. This is our foundation. So I want to go to, let me bring up, now I did this slide because this is me in my senior graduation picture. I was educated in a 2-room schoolhouse in the little community where we lived. 2-room schoolhouse. And you probably don't know this terminology, but I received what they called a double promotion, meaning I skipped a grade.
Okay.
In the elementary school.
Yeah. And
so once we finished 8th grade, the way it worked was you would then go to the all-black high school in Morrilton, which was about 15 miles away. Well, the year I was due to go, integration happened.
Wow. Okay.
So we integrated with the all-white school in Atkins. Instead of going to Morrilton, I went to Atkins. And I was just devastated by going to have to integrate. And I was the only African-American girl in my class.
Oh, wow.
It was a small school, fairly small school, 51 students in my class. That senior class was 51 students. And so I was the only African-American girl. And so I put the picture of my mother there with me because I would love to be able to talk with her now to find out what was she thinking, getting ready to send her 10th child out of that little community to the bright lights in the big city of Kansas City. There was no work or industry in that area. We worked in the fields for the big white farmers. That's how we made money. And so no parent wanted their child to stay there. So we were, as each person graduated, they left and went to, for us, it was Kansas and Missouri, because we had family there.
Okay.
And so here, Rena is getting ready to send her 10th child off to Kansas City. So what I want you to know about this is, by this time, actually, my mother was a widow. My father died when I was 5.
Wow.
So I don't have just a couple of memories of him. The older kids have greater memory, but she was a widow at this time. I think only 2 of the children had left home when my father passed. He died in 1957. My mother was actually pregnant with my baby sister.
Oh.
So she never even met him.
Wow.
So I wanted to know what Rena was thinking, getting ready to send her 10th child out of Happy Bend to this big racial, still some black, white signs and that kind of stuff going on. She was getting ready to send her 10th child off. I just wonder, what was she thinking? What was going on in her mind around that? So I was off. They did not try to hinder you. It was encouraged for you to go because there was nothing there for you. So off to Kansas City I went. You used your graduation money to buy your ticket. And I wanted to share something with you right now from The Great Migration. You may be familiar with the book, or at least the term, The Great Migration. It's a book by Isabel Wilkerson, and she titles it The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. I never considered myself to be a part of the Great Migration.
I was wondering.
I always thought it happened before me.
Yeah.
But I know the language, I know the term, right? So what I wanted to do is share a couple of excerpts from the book itself. Actually, the Great Migration, the time period that they put on it is 1915 to about 1970.
Okay.
And actually a little bit into the 70s, but they'll say 1970.
Okay.
But here's a quote from a woman. It says, "In our homes, in our churches, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there is a discussion of what is best to do. Must we remain in the South or go elsewhere? Where can we go to feel that security which other people feel? Is it best to go in great numbers or only in several families? These and many other things are discussed over and over." A colored woman in Alabama is making that statement. So that's where we were. We were in a place where it wasn't a discussion. It's just what would happen. It's what you do. And so now I've talked a lot about kind of my foundation. And I'm leaving the farm. I'm leaving the country. I'm headed to the bright lights in the big city. So that's kind of the start of my journey as a woman of God, as a woman of faith. And so I wanted to just take a minute to see if anybody had any thoughts or comments or questions for me before I continue on.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, did your mother stay there as well, or was it just kind of as each kid kind of grew up and then started their own family, then did they kind of move on, or did she stay in Happy Bend?
When I left, it was, I don't know how many months or even if it was a year later, we moved her to Kansas City. Okay. And she was willing to come. One of the things that happened is once my father passed, then my mother lived off the Social Security for the children. And so she would send us to town. The people knew Ed and Rena's children. And so we could handle all the business. The bankers didn't have a problem letting us cash checks and do all the family business. And so I was the last one to play that role before we bought a house in Kansas City and moved my mom and my baby sister to Kansas City. So she did not stay. Most of the people in the community were my father's family.
Okay.
Very few, if any of them, were my mother's family. So she was more than willing to pack up and leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if you just would want to speak more to that, just that sense of community. Like even when you were describing the preparation of the food, and how that would happen to kind of get everybody together and work through that. I mean, it seems like there was even if it was a small community, it seemed like it was a community that figured out a way to function and support each other.
Oh yeah,
and
even the vendors, like as part of getting food ready for the winter, the fruit vendors would come out into that community because we were like 1.5 miles to 2 miles off of the main highway 64 that came down through there, but they knew about us. And so they would come in and my mother would buy bushels of peaches for us to cut up. We dried fruit, we canned everything just about. And so, all that was necessary, that's what we did as a family. And each of the families in the community did that. And there were maybe 3 white families in the community, but predominantly it was African Americans. And we were all related.
Wow, yeah.
So
Okay, this is just what, and then in terms of sort of the church experience there, how did that?
Oh, the
that?
institution of the Black church. I heard something said recently that said the institution, the Black church, the institution taught us how to survive in America. It was
Wow.
invaluable. Those Easter speeches that we did and learned, and the Bible stories that we learned, those are all things that was preparing us for our journey out in the world.
Wow, yeah.
And so it was necessary.
Yeah.
It was necessary. And later I'll speak to the
Okay.
fact that without the Black church, there is no civil rights movement. Because many of the marches and a lot of the training that they did of the people who were involved in the sit-ins happened in the church.
Right,
church.
yeah.
So, it was invaluable to us.
That's great.
And even more so, it was planting seeds we didn't even know. We didn't even understand until later in life. So, other thoughts,
Yeah.
comments, or questions?
Were
We
there?
do have a question from the live chat. They're wondering if you know what happened to the house and homestead.
Well,
Since you left.
Okay, we still own the property.
Oh,
The house, of course, has fallen down. When a house is not lived in, it just disintegrates, really. So we still, it's about 100 acres. But it's so many of us, that if we ever tried to sell it or anything, but several times they wanted to look for oil on it. So, everybody has to sign and that kind of stuff. So, it's still there. Whenever we go down, we try to get over there. It's growed up and everything, but we try to get over there to where that space was.
Wow.
The well is still there. It had a big opening. They've covered it, but it's still, that container is still sitting there. So, and the pond, we had a pond. The pond is still down there. You can't hardly see it. But yeah, we have lots of families still live around in the area, but not like when we were growing up.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's what happened with the homestead.
Great.
Anything else before I continue on?
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So off to Kansas City I go. I'm leaving Happy Bend. I'm headed to the bright lights and the big city. And, I'm really grateful for my heritage. I really wanted my children and grandchildren to experience Happy Bend, Arkansas. They are city kids. The grandkids are suburbanites, so they don't know anything about, that kind of living. So
Yeah,
some of them
wow.
have had a chance to go there. And so I'm very proud of all that wide open space that we had down there, meadows, and so they don't know that kind of life. So I wanted them to be able to experience it. So I'm very proud of my upbringing. Again, a good Christian foundation, education, just high school at that point, and then also a good work ethic. That's what my parents instilled in all of us, not even really naming it, but that's what we saw and that's what we lived out when we continued on there. So that was to Kansas City. I only stayed there about 5 years.
Okay.
Doing work in different odd jobs. I worked in hospitals, in the dietary. I worked lots of catalogs at that time, lots of catalogs doing mail order. So I worked in filling mail orders for the catalogs. That was a big thing in Kansas City. And so I did some of that before getting into office work. Clerk typist, who knows that term? Clerk typist.
Yeah.
That's what I got involved in at Blue Cross Blue Shield in Kansas City. I was a clerk typist, so I really enjoyed that work, and so stayed there 5 years before moving on to Minnesota. And so here comes some major milestones in my life. When I moved to Minneapolis in 1973.
Wow.
I moved to Minneapolis in December of 1973. So I am carrying with so was I at the time. So was I at the time. So the birth of my son came at that time. Then we have, I was back in the church realm at that time. And these are major milestones in a person's life. A child, for me, meant a whole new trajectory because now somebody's dependent on me. It's more than just Janet. So that brought a new path. And then back into church. And this time, instead of AME Zion, I landed in AME without the Zion. There was one right in the neighborhood, there was no AME Zion churches in Minneapolis.
Okay.
In the Minneapolis-St. Paul area.
Okay.
So I landed in the AME church. And again, this was the beginning of a new level of my faith journey in understanding more about blacks in the Bible, about running into more issues where people struggle with, you want me to serve a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus.
Yeah.
So learning more about that issue in people's lives and how do we talk about that and how do we dialogue about that. And then I also actually got married for the first time. I married the man of my life, the sweetheart of my dreams, my sugar pie honey bunch, Mr. Johnson. And we have been married 39 years in June this year. So I was a June bride. So these are milestones that turned my life in a whole new trajectory. And so it really, again, those three things, those three goals that my parents set are starting to manifest even stronger now. There is the education, there is the work ethic, those things that they instilled in us, and the Christian foundation. They are starting to come back and manifest even stronger in my life, and I am just loving that. I landed in school, now I'm headed towards college. I get to college because I am working in an organization that puts out a memo that says you will not be considered for a management position without a degree. Not that I was interested in being a manager, but I didn't want it to stop me in case I had an interest or had the opportunity. So that sent me back to school. And my husband, my sugar pie honey bunch, he was my greatest cheerleader, really encouraging me to return to school, to work on getting my degree. And so that's what I did. I started a journey of getting my associate degree. That's where I started, in Minneapolis Community College. And so that worked very well for me. That was the beginning that I would end up in a doctoral program, but I started with an associate degree.
Yeah.
And my church development, now I'm back to this black church institution. And I am learning more and more about how important the church was in the civil rights movement and what a difference it made. The AME Church is the only denomination that started because of sociological differences rather than theological differences. It was because of their race that they had friction with the white members and started their own denomination. And so that was very informative for me. Richard Allen is the founder of the AME Church, and he sued twice in the 1800s to be independent, to be an independent denomination and not controlled by the white constituents. So
Wow.
just very encouraging to hear the history and know the history of the AME Church and the impact that it had on society. Because they've always been, the AME Church or the Black Church has always been about social justice. You know, they were heavily involved in the yellow fever epidemic that happened, you know, helping there. The civil rights movement, they worked very close with Martin Luther King to put pressure on the law till it broke. Till the civil rights law of 1965 was put in place. And so the church, I don't always agree with its theology, but you know, it had some good, solid movements that it was involved in, you know, with people and family. So I really appreciated that. And just knowing now that I've got a child, now I'm learning that I need to educate him about Black history because it is not happening in the schools.
Right, right.
And so that was important
Yeah.
for me to know myself and then to be able to share it with him. And now with my grandchildren, I don't know if you know the movie Hidden Figures.
Yes. Yes.
When that came out,
Yes.
I took my grandboys to see it. I wanted them,
yeah.
again, they
Yeah.
are suburbanites.
Okay.
And so I wanted them to see and know some of the struggles that African American have had to deal with and how you push through in spite of all the you know, walls that are put up to try to prevent you from progressing and growing and developing as a human being, as an African American male or female. So I really, really thoroughly enjoyed that movie.
Yeah.
And so
It's
again,
powerful.
taking them to things like the Martin Luther King breakfast that happens here, different events that happen every year, and then having dialogue with them about it afterwards so that they are aware or able to converse about those kinds of things. So that's these major milestones in my area, in my life, again, are making me see more and more my parents' hand on my journey. Education, good work ethic, and a good Christian foundation. Those three things that started in Happy Bend are still following me as I go to Kansas City and then on to Minnesota. One of the things I wrote about in my dissertation was we had to write about how our family impacted the U.S. economy. And the mantra that my mother gave us was get a job, go to work, and take care of yourself. That was the mantra that I received leaving Happy Bend. Get a job, go to work, and take care of yourself. So I just love Rena and her being a widow and having to raise children kind of on her own. This next slide is really the education piece. I received my associate degree from Minneapolis Community College. Earl Bowman was the president down there at the time. Some people may remember that or may know him. Then from there, over to the right of that is my bachelor's degree from Metropolitan State University in business administration. And then in the lower left is, that's my MDiv from Bethel University, or it wasn't university at the time. At the time it was Bethel College and the seminary was a separate entity. But that's when I received my Master's of Divinity at Bethel. And then my doctorate is from the University of St. Thomas in educational leadership. So again, that's the education piece. So I'm the first in my family to have a college degree. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. So any thoughts or comments at this point? This is another break where we can talk about or see if there's any questions, comments about anything I've said to point.
I have a question that's more of a, just for clarification. You mentioned the AME Church as opposed to AME Zion. What what is the difference for someone like me who doesn't know? What is that was that with the break apart with is the Zion like the black sociological?
No,
rate, or
no,
what is-
no. It's the AME is the oldest of the two.
Okay.
Just some kind of, I don't know exactly what the doctrinal, if it was doctrinal
Okay.
or what caused the break,
Okay.
or even just like with Baptist or other Pentecostal.
All right. Kind of
Usually-
like different Lutherans. kind
Yes,
of. Okay.
yes. Usually it's some kind of doctrinal issue, but I don't know exactly what it was.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Good to know.
Good question. Thank you.
So, while Carly's looking at the chat, what was it that drew you to? I mean, besides, was it mostly your mother's and father's focus on education that made you actually want to do the doctorate in educational leadership, or how did that come about as your inspiration in terms of your doctorate? Yeah.
I had been looking for a doctoral program, and so St. Thomas ran an ad in the local black paper, the Minneapolis Spokesman.
Wow.
And this is the tagline that they had: a doctorate in advancing, how was it? Critical pedagogy, advancing social justice.
Oh, yeah.
That caught
Yes.
my eye.
Yes.
Because the way they described it was, what you do is you help people know that they have a voice. You don't speak for them, but you help them to know that they have a voice and that their voice matters and that it's important. So that is what I wanted to do. Of course, once we got in there, they changed it to educational leadership, but you can still do all the coursework, around the critical pedagogy piece.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
what drew me to the doctoral program.
Wow.
Yeah, the content.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
content. Because we're still struggling in this world of voices being heard, in many of our institutions, schools, corporate life, church even. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. That's great. Question.
Yes, I have a question. You did mention that at some point in your life you had to deal with being black and having to pray to Jesus with the blue eyes. Could you, I don't know, this is a deep question probably, it's a long thing, but how did you briefly deal with that situation to be able to sustain your faith to this day?
Very good question. I don't think I had the struggle, but people all around me had the struggle. I always thought that by the time Christ came along, the races were so intermixed that no one could claim Christ. No one could claim Christ to be theirs. I think it's one of the reasons God said, don't make any pictures of me, because whoever you are, you will make him look like you. But many people around me, and I understood it, because in many of the black churches, there was a picture of a white Jesus, blonde hair, blue eyes. That's all that we had. So many people struggled with it. So the reason that I started learning about it and wanting to understand it was so that I could talk with people about it. I actually, let me see if I have it. I wanted to share, there was a comment that, what is his name? E.V. Hill was asked the question about what color was Jesus. Oh, here it is. Let me share this with you. The late, great Dr. E.V. Hill was once asked if he thought Jesus was Caucasian as depicted in paintings. This was his reply: I don't know anything about a white Jesus. I know about Christ, a Savior named Jesus. I don't know what color he is. He was born in brown Middle East. He fled to black Africa, and he was in heaven before the gospel got to white Europe. So I don't know what color he is. I do know one thing. If you bow at the altar with color on your mind, you'll get up with color on your mind. Go back again and keep going back until you no longer look at his color, but at his greatness and his power to save. I thought that was really
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
to help people to know that he had to be a person of color from that area of the world. There's no way he could have been Caucasian. That's what, to me, that's what this is saying. So as I interact with specifically African Americans, because that's where the struggle is, because again, they often say, you want me to come and worship the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus who enslaved me. And so, they struggle with that piece. So I thought that was helpful, and I've had some others too that. So maybe that helps.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts,
Thank you.
comments, or questions? So, 70 years of living. November 5th, I will have been on this earth 70 years.
Wow.
So for an hour,
Congratulations.
you got a very small taste of what my journey has been like. There's so much more. I mean, there's so much more information about what it was like and for me as a woman. One of the things I wanted to talk about was using the term Reverend Doctor.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I usually insist if I'm, on a program or something, is because of all the people the pioneers who went before me and had to go through the struggles of being allowed to even go to school or get in a doctoral program and even women being ordained. It's still a struggle.
Yes.
Some people
Yes.
still struggle with
Yes.
women being ordained. So for those who went before me, and for those who got raped, and for those who got called out their names, that's why I at least want it listed as such. Even if you don't call me that, I would like to be listed as that,
Yeah.
just in
Yeah.
honor
Yes.
of those who went before
Yes.
me and made it possible for me to be able to hold those titles and go and receive, an education at a Catholic, university kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
kind
No,
of
I'm
wanted to
with. I
mention
hear you.
that.
It's so important. Would you be willing to speak a little bit about the Connected to the Vines ministry?
Sure.
I
Yeah.
would love to hear more about that
Um,
and how that came to be. With your husband and.
I was torn between two passages of scripture as I was thinking about what God would have for me to do. And the Connected to the Vine, John 15 was one of them, because without him, without that Christian foundation, I wouldn't be able to do nothing. The other passage that really tugged at my heart was the one where he talks about everything you want is coming after you. I can't recall what it is, but there was two passages of scripture that I was torn about having for my ministry name. And so I landed with Connected to the Vine. I just felt like that's the one. If I stay connected to God, if that's my foundation, then I will bear much fruit. I really liked kind of what that scripture depicted. So there are 4 arms to the ministry, Connected to the Vine. I am a certified spiritual director, so I offer spiritual direction. There is retreat. I run retreats or workshops, those kinds of things, speaking engagements. And then I've done some faith-based curriculum for some different organizations. And then I also, I'm working on my first book. So
Congratulations.
So that's Connected to the
that's
Vine.
Super exciting. Yeah.
That's
And I'm aware of just from some of your work too that you have a passion sort of for some contemplative practices. And I wonder, it was interesting as you were speaking about just your childhood and thinking about you on the property and was there anything about you, like your connection to nature, that like connects to the contemplative piece of what you're doing now? I don't know. Maybe that's but not really.
Certainly not at the time.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
but,
yeah.
but really, yes, at the time.
Yeah.
You know, we wouldn't have named it that.
Right.
We
right.
wouldn't have called it that,
Yeah.
without a doubt. And we're learning even now as I get into this contemplative practices that in the African American community, we may be doing contemplative practices, but we wouldn't use that language.
Right.
We wouldn't
Yeah.
call it that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
many, Howard Thurman certainly is one. I'm going to give one of his quotes here in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly was doing contemplative practices, and but he wouldn't have called it that either.
Mm-hmm.
Now they name it that afterwards, but you know, he talked to an oak tree.
Yeah.
He spent
Yeah.
some time. That's where he really grew and developed, under this big old oak tree.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, for me too. It was in childhood, lying under an oak tree, you know, for hours, like feeling that. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, I wouldn't have named, or you don't name it that. But there's something about that silence, and just that present. Yeah.
And see, that's the thing. When we think contemplative practices, we think silence,
Right.
but not necessarily so
Yeah.
for African Americans, or maybe other cultures as well. So the contemplative practices is just evolving for me. You know, your faith continually evolves. So contemplative practices is something that I am learning about and growing in and developing and looking to share more in the African American community. Maybe because we use all this lingo.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
know, that nobody even really knows how to describe it or explain it to somebody who is not, you know, into these Christianese that we use. So this is my faith journey evolving, learning about contemplative practices, learning about mysticism and mystics. You know, all of that is part of my journey, and it is evolving as I continue to journey on in these years.
For those of us who are maybe not as knowledgeable in that, how would you define the contemplative practice? Like, does that just like silence in nature, or is it just kind of meditation? I'm not sure what that is exactly.
Yeah, for me, I would say it is whatever centers you, whatever brings you into unity with the divine, whoever the divine is for you.
Cool.
That's that's how I would name it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was also curious, you said you're writing a book. Is that more of a memoir or an autobiography, or is it on something else like the contemplative practices?
It's really about on Christian education
Okay.
in the church, and because it's what my doctoral work was on. Are we making disciples, or are we making members?
Oh,
That's
wonderful question.
fascinating. Yeah.
So that's kind of what it's around. So
Yeah. Interesting.
um,
You might want to share your quote with us
yes,
that you have.
it's a quote from Howard Thurman. He has lots, but this is one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah. You
I
can
actually
finish that.
have it on the. Oh, it's so small you can't see it. Oh, that's terrible.
No, they'll see it. Yeah.
Okay. This is his quote. The mystic's concern with the imperative for social action is not merely to improve the condition of society. It is not merely to feed the hungry, not merely to relieve human suffering and human misery. If this were all, in and of itself, it would be important, surely. But this is not all. The basic consideration has to do with the removal of all that prevents God from coming to the fullness himself in the life of the individual. Whatever there is that blocks this calls for action. I love that. That is one of my favorite quotes by Howard Thurman. And really, it's just that last piece. The basic consideration has to do with the removal of all that prevents God from coming to the fullness himself in the life of Janet. Whatever there is that blocks that, I need to do something about it. Calls me to action. So that was my kind of closing that I wanted to share the Howard Thurman quote with you. And I have a beautiful song. I think they're going to send it to you.
I'll share it in the
Yes.
chat.
Oh, it is
So,
just
yes.
wonderful.
Do you want to say anything about the song, or it will be shared with you in the chat, and you can listen to it and enjoy it. As we're not, it's a copyrighted song, so we're not able to live stream it with you, but just wanted to share that with you. It's lovely,
Yes,
and
it
it's
is
bilingual, isn't it? Right? It's got multiple
Many different
languages
cultures
and
people
expressions
represented in the video
in that.
itself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's about joy and strength and pride and peace and love and all those things that I have. The picture depicts it for me. The world didn't give me what you see, how I'm looking there. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. Those things, joy, peace, love, happiness. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. So,
Yeah. Are there any other questions before we close up? Any other comments?
We did have, Doug offered that using your titles really does send a powerful message to
Yeah.
those yet to
Yeah.
come. That lets people know that that can happen for them too, so that they too can follow their dreams, which was a nice sentiment from Doug.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great,
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
thanks, Doug.
Well, yeah, I just really want to thank you so much just for your openness, for sharing your story, and just, again, within an hour, we're opening a window, but I think just really sharing with us the power of where you came from and how that really built you and is still building you with, God's grace into just this amazing, powerful woman. And I really appreciate your witness and your testimony and just being able to go on like this and trusting us to do this with you. So
Well, thank
you.
you. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you for
Marion.
being here.
I appreciate Wisdom Way giving me the opportunity. It felt a little scattered. I'm used to Zoom, and
It's a little different
So-
environment.
It went very smoothly.
Yeah, lovely.
So thank you, and please let Wisdom Way know I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'm
Yes,
grateful.
we will. Thank you.